Hi, everyone. I am Jason C. Brown, and I'm here with a dear guest of mine, Marie Janicek, of
Hello.
Intuitive Movement. And Marie inspires me to be a better mover on a daily basis. And, I'm a 50-year-old male. I have all of the aches and pains that a 50-year-old martial artist would have. And when I see Marie move, it inspires me to be a better mover and a better artist as well. So,
Oh,
Marie, thank you for being here with me.
thank you so much for having me, Jason. It's such a treat. I was actually just talking to a few friends about this invitation yesterday, and it's such an honor to be invited by someone like you, who's one of my first teachers in the personal training and fitness space when I entered this field. And I really appreciate everything you do. I appreciate your heart, your passion, your thirst for really helping people connect with themselves in a way that's meaningful beyond just physicality.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And for the listeners, I think, when did we meet originally? 10 years ago, maybe?
Yes, 10
10 years
years
ago
ago.
in Manhattan at 43rd and 5th in a little
Exactly. You
basement.
were my first workshop through Equinox at the time,
Oh,
back when
oh,
when I just started my tenure as a personal trainer there.
oh, that's good. I'm glad we met. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, Marie, I am going to throw you some tough questions at you, but you're such an elegant speaker, and I love your approach to movement in life. So I know you'll ace these questions, right?
I love tough questions. I think we need more of them, so I can't
Give
wait to hear.
give me three ways that you and I, as movement professionals or whatever label we want to wear, can make moving fun again.
Oh,
How can we
this is
make
a
moving?
fun one.
Because you and I, we come from a field where our
Mm,
our actual reach into the population is very small. With all of the fitness industry available to our population, we only reach 3%.
mm-hmm,
And then the dropout rate of that 3% is huge.
mm-hmm.
How do you and I, as people that love our craft, how do we make moving fun again so we can attract more people?
Well, here's what I see as like the fundamental thing that needs to shift. We have an incorrect assumption that's sort of been conditioned into the general population through the last 50, 60 years, probably a little bit longer. Um, but as exercise became a necessity to cover our basic health needs versus movement being something that we just naturally did in our day. Like there's even been a huge shift in terms of how often people move in office in the last 40 years because as the internet has streamlined things and become faster and more integrated, even in an office space, there used to be a time where people used to have to get up to go to a phone or send a fax. And now with email and GChat and all these things, that has sort of been taken out of the equation altogether, which means people have to exercise to get minimum movement needs in. And this also works directly in opposition with our evolutionary biology because our evolutionary biology always wants ease and it always wants stability and it relies on patterning and doing more of what you're doing the most. So when you sit the most, you actually don't really want to move. And we have this in contrast with fitness world, the exercise world, which has created a belief system of hustle and grind, push through pain. It's going to be hard, it's going to be uncomfortable, and that's how you know you're doing good work. And that's absolutely true. That is one part of the equation when it comes to moving our bodies. But what I see 99% of people missing out on is this relationship to their bodies through the lens of pleasure and play and joy. And ironically, the main reason anybody goes into a really intensive workout regime or program or tries to make a decisive shift in relationship to their bodies and their movement practices is because they want to feel those things in their body. And they imagine they can get that through changing the physicality, through changing their aesthetic, losing fat, gaining muscle tone and definition. And what I've discovered is play is probably the most powerful resource we have, and so is pleasure. We are wired to feed into pleasure, and there's a really powerful set of neurochemical changes that happen when we have a positive feedback loop through pleasure. And when we are not prioritizing that through our movement practices, this is where it gets really hard to want to move, to feel
Right.
inspired to move, and to like understand that it's play. So you asked for three things, but for me, this is kind of the key one that a lot of things stem from. It's like allowing ourselves to know that actually if we do things that feel good, that's a really powerful jumping off point to lead us into all the fundamental things we want. And it's a lesson I've noticed be very true and present for me and my clients multiple times over. By following the fun, you're sort of stimulating a multidimensional approach to fitness, which is beyond just the physical. You're creating an emotional relationship as well as a positive mental relationship with yourself. And then when you have that, when you are hitting those moments of discomfort or challenge, you have a very different foundation to jump off from. So the challenge starts to feel more like an exploration, more like a game, rather than this like gritty chore that's going to absolutely like um derail you or mean that you're not capable of meeting this challenge with your body or with this movement system that you're playing with.
I really like that you said an emotional connection with the movement, because I think that's one of the biggest things that we're lacking, is because we give people these brutal workouts and there's zero emotional connection, and there's zero reason to come back for the second one or the third one or the 6 week program, right?
And
Even
the irony of that is like we like to think of our world as such like a rational, physical, mechanical thing, but we all know this through like evolutionary biology and psychology. People make decisions emotionally. So why aren't we paying attention to the emotional tone and quality of our relationship with our bodies and movement? If you don't have a healthy emotional relationship with yourself, and you notice that emotional tone of being like I make noises because it's like there aren't even words, but if you feel yucky thinking about going to the gym and doing your thing, like that's an important signal. Like maybe you need to think out of the box and find simpler movement things that like are a lower bar to entry that actually like
yes.
have you feeling that like that joy is probably one of your most powerful vehicles to like bring you to what you want. And as you said, like that's for me like the biggest thing that's missing in fitness right now.
Yes. So I'm not sure if I made a video of this recently, and I started a hiking walking club at the local YMCA, and 50 people registered. Five
Yeah.
zero. And I think I'm the youngest person, and I'm 50. I think I'm the youngest person there. And
Hmm.
like you said, the low barrier of entry. You could never get this population to go to a high intensity interval training session or whatever, right? Kettlebell class or even a strength training class. So many of them don't even want to go strength training. But if you can
Mm-hmm.
get these people to walk, which is probably one of the most functional activities they can do within their age group and their lifestyle. And I'm just so inspired by this group. And the number one, so I took a little survey afterwards. And the number one reason why they joined the hiking club was to meet new people and form new relationships.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah. Well, think about it. For me, I think when we have shared movement experiences, shared experiences in our body that test us, like that creates a really powerful bond, and it always has from the beginning of time. And especially in an era of technology, people want experiences where they get to be in their body and meet people in their body, especially post COVID.
Yes.
And I love that we talked about this low barrier of entry. The number one thing I recommend people do more is walk more.
Yes.
And like one practice I've recently been adding in that is high priority for me is actually barefoot walking in nature.
Yes.
And I also scaled really low. Like I had a lot of people watching me and commenting on like, oh, I was like so strong. It's like, well, I would start on a hike shoes on, wait till I found a place that looked a lot gentler for me. And then I would just walk as long barefoot, like holding my sneakers as I felt comfortable. Initially, that was maybe 5 minutes, but what was really incredibly powerful to witness, and this is something I witnessed time and time again when we set our standards with the low bar of entry, you will often surpass that low bar. And talk about creating a positive feedback loop. When you give yourself just the small little bit to start with, and then you're like, oh, that was great, that felt good, I want to do more. That starts to establish that positive relationship with movement and your sense of empowerment and your sense of devotion to
Mm.
yourself. And as you scale from that point, then it gets like, that's where that excitement and sort of that zest to be in your body and explore it in different ways really gets activated.
Yes. I can't remember where I read this, Marie, but have you ever heard of state-specific learning?
No.
So such a great phrase. So the
Hmm.
emotional state, to go back to your emotional point, the emotional state that we're in when we learn something new gets
Mm-hmm.
retained along with the intellectual information. So if,
Mm,
for example, if I'm very scared when I'm learning algebra, my body will remember the fear anytime that I have to talk about algebra.
mm,
And I always think about that phrase, state specific learning, when introducing movement to new individuals, right?
mm,
Like your first workout is going to be burpees and 400-meter sprints. Forget it. They are
mm-hmm,
going to
mm-hmm.
retain that. It's so weird that we have to use these phrases even, but like emotional trauma for those.
Yeah.
Seriously, it's crazy that we have to use these terms when we're discussing just introducing people to movement.
Well, the truth is I notice a lot of feel people feel pretty traumatized in relationship to their body. And trauma is a scale and it's also always fluctuating. But I love that you mentioned that because it is so true. And like no there's also this element of when you're in a state of fear, and this could even just be psychological fear of not being accepted, fear of getting it wrong, you do not learn, right? And movement is actually first and foremost a learning practice, right? It's a
Yes.
multidimensional way of learning, and like there's a physical component drawn in, but it's a very complex multidimensional learning practice of like
Yes.
not only conceptually understanding something but somatically understanding it and then emotionally navigating what's going on there. So for me, movement is such an elite level technology
Yes.
and it's an incredibly powerful self-development and self-awareness technology, and I mean that like way beyond just what's happening physically, but because you are engaging with your physicality, and that will call up this sense of vulnerability from an emotional standpoint. It will call up like neurological patterning from a mental stand. Like there's so much that gets activated there. And when we're not paying attention to what's getting activated there and responding accordingly, like listening to that and pivoting in relationship to that, this is where people are falling short and then creating more fractures in their sense of self. And this is where we see this very prevalent divide in wanting to see the body as separate from the mind and treating them as such. And for me, that's like, this is a key thing that changed and transformed my relationship to movement was like paying attention to that mental emotional tone. And if something is scaring me, like reevaluate how I approach it, like scale back, make it easier. Like what do I need to do to be able to approach this and really learn versus like throwing myself in a panic cycle around it where I'm not going to be able to learn at all. And more importantly, like will not be able to grow in the ways I intended to grow by stepping into this practice.
Yes, that's beautiful. Marie, can you give our listeners a little bit about your background? You can give us as much background as you're comfortable with, but specifically your movement background and your training.
Yeah. So I began my movement journey very, very young. I was brought into a dance class by my babysitter at 2 years old, and I fell head over heels in love. And at that point, nobody could tear me from dance. My parents definitely tried multiple times over my youth and especially my teen years, where things started to get really challenging from a psychological perspective. Not only the challenges of being a dancer, where there's so much body dysmorphia and eating disorders and just disordered patterns at play, but there was also a lot of bullying and politics in the studio dynamics, which was really intense. But
Where did you grow
um,
up, Marie? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Colorado.
Colorado. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And I loved dance because to me, um, it was such a beautiful space to be able to allow my emotions to flow. For me, what hooked me into dance was you had so much range and creativity of self-expression, and I loved the feeling of being able to move my body and channel whatever emotion or whatever thought pattern was like getting me obsessed and upset and be able to completely like alchemize and release it. And I would feel that with other forms of movement, whether it was hiking or biking. I loved moving, but dance in particular felt like this very important vehicle for emotional transformation. And I think it wasn't until my late 20s where I realized most dancers don't appreciate and enter dance in that space. I think we all feel it. It's why once a dancer, kind of always a dancer, but
Mm.
there isn't a huge awareness as to like, this is the magic that happens in that space because dance has its own world of challenges and kind of limitations because there's a lot put on aesthetics, even from a creative standpoint. But the most powerful dancers you see are the ones who are really moving from the inside out and the ones who really have that relationship. You can tell like it's not even about the technique or the moves they do, it's you just feel so much coming through their bodies in that expression, and that's where movement gets powerful. But I got injured a lot and nobody was able to explain why I was injured or like gave me good solutions for how to deal with that. So as I was moving into college, I personally wanted to be a professional dancer, but my parents really pushed me to get an education at the same time. So I decided to go the pre-physical therapy route and pre-med while also pursuing my dance career because I wanted to understand why were things breaking in my body and how did I fix them? And I selfishly was like, if I can become indestructible, like it would be cool to also help people with that. Very quickly I realized physical therapy had so many limitations to actually being able to bring people to full health the way I wanted. And so when I graduated, I decided to try my hand at personal training because I saw potential for it to be more injury preventative and not limited by insurance companies' idea of what health was. And I loved learning about the body. And I especially loved getting to experience movement through the lens of weightlifting because it was such a different kind of language and energy and relationship with gravity and myself. And I went after every single piece of education I could. Like, I think I went to 12 different workshops in a 4-year period, if not more. Um, Rose through the ranks of Equinox pretty quickly, then ended up building my own business. And the deeper I went into personal training, the more I was seeing these pieces of how we relate to our body being completely bypassed or not spoken about and not taught. And I was kind of shocked at how often I would watch personal trainers like not really coach people through movement itself, but really through the endpoints of specific exercises, and sort of let a lot of details, which I actually thought were really important and key, slip through the cracks. And in addition, I was also watching, such a physical and mechanistic view be perpetuated as to like how to gain success, how many calories in, how many calories out. And I would witness some people like really fixating on that equation, but being so stressed, so distraught, so upset, and also angry and feeling frustrated with themselves as they were negotiating all these details and watching nothing shift. And to me, I felt very strongly that like we were missing a huge part of that equation by just looking at that analysis. And something I was already finding myself doing was, how do I make movement fun for people? How do I show them the joy I feel in almost anything I do? And the people the people who I got to work with who started to see that piece and were really drawn into it, we had some magical experiences as like in that one-on-one coaching partnership. And as I started to see that was kind of what I was more interested in, which led me into studying more meditation, more spirituality, more quantum mechanics. And for me, that 7-year tenure of really wanting to understand the metaphysical space and the mental and emotional channels we have in our body and how they relate to our physicality, the more I'm sort of seeing like this is the missing equation. And the more I've corrected that within myself, it's wild the stuff I've been able to do. And a lot of people assume that's because of my dance background, that I'm an excellent mover because I was a dancer. I always say, no, it's not because I was a dancer. It's because I've been obsessed with how things feel in my body. And I've been obsessed with how things make me feel in my body in relationship to myself. So a lot of what you see when you watch me move, it's not technique, it's not skill, it's not really even strength, but I've mined technique, grace, skill, and strength just through this personal obsession of like getting to know myself and being with myself and really feeling all parts of myself every time I step into a physical and movement oriented practice.
Do you find that many people find dance intimidating?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
because dance is like the ultimate expression of physical vulnerability. And it actually, in a much more powerful way, sort of steps on the piece that most people are already feeling vulnerable with when they enter an exercise program, which is like, am I worthy? Am I valuable? Am I going to look stupid? Am I going to look weird? Like, I have to look good. And looking good is beyond just like physically, like having the aesthetic. People want to look good when they move their body. and and dance especially is an area where there's so much room to explore and experiment. But in the era of the internet and TikTok, we have a very specific set of, I guess, aesthetic markers we look for. And as a result, people feel like they have to be able to dance on that level. And they're not willing to give themselves that space to be extra vulnerable, to look chunky, to fall out of things, to be weird, to be wild, to be strange. And this is something that I actively spent years with and continue to spend time with, because if you don't give yourself the space to just sort of like explore movement and make those mistakes and like not necessarily feel graceful and good in your body, you don't give yourself the opportunity to find that harmony, to find that fluency, to find that grace. Like, it's a baby deer, right? We watch babies get born, and like nothing about them is really graceful for a while. You've watched your kids grow up,
Right.
but
Right.
like through that perpetual failure, falling, flailing, like there's a coherence that's found. And that discomfort is a very small window of time. And most importantly, and this is something I really cue in on, You have to be more obsessed with the sensations you feel than like what your body physically looks like. And the more you get obsessed with the sensations, that's where you find that internal language within yourself to be able to like recognize like when something is flowing, when something is not, how to pivot, what to do. And beyond that, you make your movement practice something that is for you. It becomes more autonomous, and it becomes more authentic, and it becomes more for your personal benefit.
Yeah. You know, our friend Kyle Fincham from Behind the Movement,
Yeah.
he wrote a great article on his blog about being courageous to have your own practice.
Yeah.
I thought it was so good. Were you ever able to, I know we spoke about this when I was actually so kindly on your show, um, able to ever hook up with Fighting Monkey?
No, I haven't been able to tap into their stuff, but I know it's really powerful. I really appreciate what they're doing, especially like being a dancer myself and like
Right.
watching dancers create what I know is a very elite approach to movement, very smart, very thoughtful in terms of understanding like what is core to movement in terms of skill and coordination and a sense of play and like push and pull tension and all the different
Yeah.
mechanisms that they orient around.
They do this thing called coordinations, and it's very dance-like, I'll say. I'll use that term, dance-like.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great introduction for people like me who, and I actually think I have rhythm, and this has been confirmed by my Brazilian wife that says I do actually have rhythm. But in those Fighting Monkey coordinations, I feel like I can make many more errors than
Mm,
like a good friend of mine. Her mom teaches bar
mm-hmm.
and ballet, and I feel like I attempted to take a
Mm,
class, and I felt like there was just so many corrections that
mm-hmm.
she would give me. And she was a great teacher. I don't want to diminish her teaching skill, but there was a right way and a wrong way to do those.
Absolutely.
And Fighting Monkey was just like, nah, man, just flail those arms any, like whatever you want to do. And it's like, okay, I can sort of dance like this without being, like you said, like so self-conscious about the errors that I'm making.
Well, dance is like a spectrum and like a world in and of itself. And we like there's certain dance styles that are really dialed in and specific, just like with weightlifting and fitness,
Yes.
right? When
Mhm.
you get under a barbell, like there is a right way and there is a wrong way. Same thing like the heavier your kettlebell gets, like you have to get more precise. And ballet is very similar. Like in that dialed in precision, it's really interesting to me when people want to train like to be more graceful and fluid that they go into ballet because it's one of the hardest places to start. And I even had the privilege of working with a ballet teacher who really understood biomechanics and injury prevention and like the energy systems and spirals in the body. And when she retaught me like how to actually approach ballet, I would say most people are like even dancers who are in ballet are not moving from the right place. It is a deeply internal rotation based system, and it's
Mhm.
rotation in all the directions we were never designed to move. uh it's it's incredibly challenging, but there's also dance forms where it is more about like that freedom and there is more room for play, and I really appreciate that full range. And I think it's important that there are multiple access points for people to be able to start exploring their bodies. And I'm thrilled to sort of see the lines blurring between dance and fitness in different systems, different class models. I think we're going through a huge renaissance with movement right now, which is really satisfying to me because it's really needed.
It is. I think we need like this. I hate the word hybrid, but I don't know of a better word. Um, I think we need this hybrid model where we have people like you and fitness people or people that maybe
Mm,
are a little bit more educated on. And I know you're extremely educated, but I mean, you're this dancer, this mover over here, and then we have the personal trainer that's never done any of your work, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's
Mm-hmm.
how we can blend some of the physical preparation and blend your work together. We sort of need this hybrid community where we can expose people to both.
Yeah. I mean, everything's a continuum, and
Yeah.
every continuum is actually a circle, right? Anything you think is an opposite is actually part of its its other side, yin and yang.
Yeah.
That's true for structured systems. It's true for like freedom-based systems. It's true for like focused weight training, and it's true for creative exploration. And I remember I was making these like quadrant like XY graphs to sort of illustrate and demonstrate this to people, and it was really exciting when I was first sharing that a few years ago, to watch people like be like, "Oh my gosh, this makes so much sense," but it's true. And this is something that I've noticed within myself. Everyone talks about like you need to learn the rules before you break them. That is a safe way to learn things. And at the same time, I don't always agree. I think there is so much more intelligence in chaos. There's so much more of a harmonic organization when we allow ourselves to be in the free form than when we are trying to like only express ourselves through a structured system. And I see this as like a key piece that's missing in fitness, because this is actually where embodiment begins. Embodiment begins in like creating that sense of comfort in moving without having specific direction. And if you don't feel safe in that, if you are not actively finding ways to get comfortable being uncomfortable in that space, like you mentioned, Kyle said, being courageous enough to meet that part of yourself, like you actually are missing a very foundational component that lives with you when you do structured forms, which is able to tell you how to make those minute adjustments depending on your body, your energy, that level that day. Like these are such key pieces in any movement system, being able to self-regulate. And you can't begin to self-regulate unless you've been in that space of just creating the relationship with yourself.
Great. So beautiful. All right. So if somebody comes to you and says, how would you introduce somebody to your approach of working with people?
So this is an interesting piece, because I have this vision of what I know more of us need, but each individual, like especially on an individual level, we're all at a different starting point in relationship to that. And I have so many different skill sets to draw on, and this is actually the fun part for me with individual work, is to just really get to know a person, understand what they want, also at the same time like notice what they need and find a way to bridge the two of them.
Hmm.
But something I am driving more in the direction of is like when people approach me, I make it very clear that what we're doing is a multi-dimensional practice, in that like we are doing physical stuff, but in order for this process to be powerful, in order for this to be a process you can carry forward with you beyond our time together, we have to be willing to incorporate these other components. And it may feel like slow going at first, but I'm a big fan of slow, because I've been having so much fun operating off of a linear timeline and instead going on an exponential timeline. And what I've noticed with myself is when you start slow and small, and we are paying attention to the nuances of these positive feedback loops mentally and emotionally, as well as physically, it what feels like barely any momentum starts to slowly shift until like you're getting like massive leaps ahead that you didn't expect or think were possible. And that's the level I like to operate from. So usually I assess people on their relationship to their body in these multiple quadrants, find like where their desire is. This is a huge piece of that emotional equation. Like, what do you want to feel like in your body? What do you want to feel like in relationship to your body? And this is the challenging part in many ways, because many people don't know how to begin thinking around that question.
Right.
Like a lot of people
They probably
No, they
never
won't.
heard that question ever, right?
And that's such a key piece. If you can't begin to imagine and daydream what that ideal relationship is like, if you can't begin to name emotions or qualities or thoughts or associative words to like what you want, you don't know what you're moving towards. And that's like the key first step in like guiding towards anything in relationship to your body is like knowing what you want and like knowing how what you want feels. If you don't know what you want, how what you want feels, you don't have a barometer, like a guidance system to know when something's in alignment, when something's off, when to make a change, when to reevaluate. And this is often why so many people try and fail or fall off the wagon with something or are not able to stay consistent. So this is a huge piece I activate for people. And then when it comes to the actual movement work, this is another challenging component that not everyone's ready for, but I'm actively asking everyone I work with to pay attention to how something feels and to pay attention to that emotional component and to really give it thought, to really give it space. Because as you start to notice that, it creates that neural network and that internal sort of blueprint to recognize like when something is feeding you, when something is giving you life and joy and pleasure, and when something is not. And that is a really essential part for me in any movement to like really be able to feel all those sensations and to get curious about them and to be open to them and to not have judgments towards them, but to use movement as a practice to really fully be with yourself on all levels.
Great, beautiful. So Marie, you're to me, you have a very artistic practice, and weight training to me is not. I mean, people will hate me for saying this, but it's not very artistic. I mean, there's an art to it, I'm sure, right?
Mm,
Or the art of strength or the art of weightlifting, whatever, right? But I actually make divisions. Right? What you do is artistic. What some meathead is doing inside the gym is not artistic. And I don't care
mm,
if I get flack for this. But
mm-hmm.
within your own practice, how much of your work is what we would call fitness or physical preparation, and how much of it is just going with the flow and improv, or as you say, intuitive
Mm.
work?
It really fluctuates depending on where I'm at emotionally. um and like what I'm noticing I'm craving. But it's interesting you mentioned that strength isn't really like an artistic practice. Something I've allowed myself to lean into more as I'm really digging into what intuitive movement means for me right now. I actually do think there's an artistry in strength, but it's not in the ways people think. And the artistry of strength lies in like really meeting yourself in the specific movement that you're doing and like allowing yourself to fully feel and like have a presence and like even like decide like what am I going to emote in this. Are you emoting like anger and like power and assertion? Are you emoting like precision and control? And really these are all key factors that allow someone to expand their artistry. Like you want to be like the more precise a painter can be with their brush, like the more tools they have to draw from in their creative expression, whether you're doing like really immaculate brush strokes or you're like going more Jackson Pollock style. Jason Jackson, Freudian slip. But you know, like there's so many techniques with artistry, and for me strength training of all kinds is like a really valuable tool to enhance my skill set. Now I like got under a barbell for the first time in probably 6 months a couple of months ago.
I
And
cannot see
what
you under a barbell. So
oh my
crazy. I
I
can
actually
see.
I'm gonna share a video because I had so much fun. I did like a lighter weight. I was just kind of warming up, and as I was warming up at like the lighter weight of like my back squat, I was getting to the bottom and I was hanging out in the base of my back squat, like ass to grass with the barbell, and I was like, this feels really good to just like hang out at the bottom here. And as I was hanging out in the bottom, I was like, what happens if I start to shift my weight in other ways, like with that barbell, with control, like moving really slow, really dialing into the sensation? And I know everyone in the gym was like, what's this weirdo doing? Talk about having an artistic or an actual authentic relationship with your body. You have to not give any fucks what any,
It's
I
totally
hope I
true.
can curse here. You have to not care what anyone is going to think
Yes,
about.
yes.
uh and and luckily I'm in the space where like I'm here for me. I don't care if people are watching me. I hope they're having a good time watching me if they are, but I'm here to feel what I want to feel. And so as I was in the base of that squat, I just like was allowing myself to play with sort of like side shifts. And then I was like curious, could I get one end to touch without losing my grounding with my feet and then have that control to come back? And then like could I twist and could I shift forward and back and maintain that control? And I had like the most fun I've ever had with a barbell, allowing myself to play in that space.
Yes.
And so I think there's just so much opportunity to get creative, but to that point, like I was using that tool differently. I was at like
Yes.
a sub
Mm.
maximal weight. I was at like a third of like I was at a weight where I could easily probably do 10 to 15 reps of that weight. So that's a very different place to play than if I was at my single or like even 3 rep limit, like
Right.
doing much
Mm.
heavier weight. That would not have been a time to play. But there's so many ways that strength can be expressed and explored. And kind of coming back to your question through another circle, for me a lot of my strength work happens without tools, without assistance from things like kettlebells and barbells. And it really is this this desire to find different pathways that I want my body to move and to like play around with expanding my ability to move there. So I do a lot of foot mobility, I do a lot of spine mobility, I do a lot of hand and wrist mobility. And for me, these 3 sections of the body are like the most important because it's where your body draws in all the information of like what muscles to signal how and why. It's through the palms of our hands and the soles of our feet. And our spine is like the great transducer. It's like the highway. It's where all those pathways move through. So even if you think you're, doing an exercise for your shoulders and back, like your hands, your feet, your spine are involved in that equation. And if these sections are not moving fluently and fluidly, if they do not actually have command over the ranges they are designed to, those limitations will manifest in places like your knee, your head and neck, your shoulder, your hip, and even in your back and all the other places people get injuries from. But most strength is oriented around the big guns. It's hips, it's shoulders, and then it's abs. Well, like that to me, like these 3 areas, the more I attend to those from a mobility standpoint, my strength is like continuing to exponentially expand when I do actually get under a barbell or a kettlebell, or even do like a strength intensive practice like rock climbing. It's been really fascinating to see. But to your point, like I allow it to fluctuate and play. I wait for the impulse to arise. And especially because I have such a hefty sense of pleasure in relationship to my practice, it's very easy for me to make those decisions and to know what I want in service of myself in that way.
Beautiful. So, Marie, how I know you live in Colorado,
Mm-hmm.
and how is your Spanish living in Colorado? Is it okay? No
I mean,
trouble.
I don't really speak Spanish. I learned it, but I haven't practiced since I was 12.
So when you mentioned your hands, and I always loved. I'm so amazed by this. Do you know how I'm a like there's some people that are like feet freaks, like that they study the
Mm,
feet, and I really study the hands. And
mm.
do you know how do you say learn in Spanish or Portuguese or any Latin-based language? It's so deep. To me, it's deep. It's probably not deep to anyone else, but to
I'm
learn.
trying to remember. I don't think I can recall it. No.
So if you study under somebody, what is it? What are you? You are their
I
apprentice.
Yeah, apprentice.
So Spanish and Portuguese, the word for to learn is aprender.
Oh,
It's
apprenticing.
literally to take by hand. So when you
Mm,
were talking about learning through our palms, I was just like all those little connections in my brain were lighting up because I love to talk about that word. Like our ancestors knew. I would be interested to know what it is in Slavic languages also.
to
Slovak.
learn, uh, naučit, naučit.
Okay, not related. But
Yeah.
they knew that we learned through so like it literally means to take by hand. And the
Mm-hmm.
Spanish, the
Mm-hmm.
Portuguese, the Italians, my French is horrible, so I won't even try the French. But aprender, to take by hand, or you're an
Mm-hmm.
apprentice, or even when cops arrest somebody, they apprehend, and it literally means grab. It's such a
Mm-hmm.
cool
Mm-hmm.
word, cool word. Maria, how important is environment to you in your practice and the practice of your students? Like, do you go outside as often as possible? Do you change the textures? I mean, Colorado, if I were you, I mean, Pennsylvania is a beautiful state, but like Colorado, come on. But
Oh yeah. I mean, this is a huge piece of my life right now is like reorienting my schedule based off of like how do I be outside more and how do I be
yes.
more
Hmm.
texturally and sensationally attuned. Um, it really depends on the person I'm working with. I think because this emotional equation is so relevant and intuitive movement can be a really vulnerable space. With intuitive movement, I mean not just like moving freely, but like taking the time to tap in and really feel, even when I am giving like specific mobility and strength centered and focused exercises. But I want people to be in spaces where they feel safe to be vulnerable, where they feel safe to explore. And interestingly enough, outdoors is not the easiest place for people to do that
No,
unless they're in a group of people and being led into that. But I often find, an indoor space, especially a personal space, is a much easier place for people to begin examining this relationship to themselves and
define
allowing
personal, Marie. Define personal. What do you mean personal
a
space?
personal space. I mean, a space where someone feels safe to themselves. So, like, usually in home, like
Their home.
yeah, I've discovered that usually in home is a place where people feel more comfortable exploring this. And if it's not in home, being able to have a private space that feels nourishing to them. Sometimes a fitness studio or a yoga studio in a fitness space can be a good place, but if you're likely to get interrupted or if you have people walking in and out, that can be really tricky, which is why I use the word personal. Usually in a personal space, it's easier to initiate those boundaries to make sure that like you're going to be able to fully be with yourself and be awkward and weird and not feel safe all the time, and from that place generate a sense of safety. But I do think being outside is incredibly important, and I actually encourage people to spend a lot more time walking and taking outdoor walks in particular for that reason. And something I've been initiating with a lot of my friends and people who have been watching me the last few months is like spending time barefoot out in nature. And not necessarily with like the point of like, I'm gonna hike X amount of miles, but just to like give your feet that sensory variability, because our sensory capacity in our feet and our hands are like really, really high. And the sensory paves way for the motor capacity. So the more you engage that sensory relationship with hands and feet and textures and pressure and weight shifts, like that is actually where you're building the foundation to have more motor control, more motor mobility, more motor fluency. And it's really fascinating to feel within myself, like knowing all that I know and also having this intimate relationship with my system, how walking barefoot in many ways just resets a lot of the baseline patterning that we were evolutionarily meant to have, that many of us are losing in our current modern world where we don't get to move and be in our bodies as regularly evolution initially intended.
Marie, so one reason why I started this show was because I'm selfish and I just want to pick the beautiful brains of brilliant people like you. So
That's why I started my show.
one thing that I would like, one vision I have is studying under you,
Mm,
learning your approach on a deck or even on a nice, beautiful plateau or prairie
yeah.
in Colorado.
Ah, I love that.
Right,
Yeah.
with the mountains in the background.
Yeah.
No mountain lions, please, or
We find places where they'll leave us alone.
Marie.
Yeah, I recently got to be up deep in the Colorado mountains, and I like found my way up to these beautiful sort of cascading rock bluffs, and it was so magical to just like move in nature for like hours at a time with nobody around, and to just like revel in that beauty. And yeah,
Yes,
it's a magical experience.
I was just in Copper Mountain. Do you know Copper Mountain?
Yes, I know Copper very well.
12,000. I'm at sea level in Philadelphia.
It's a big jump.
That first day, I was like, okay, that's a little interesting. I've been at elevation many a time, but I remember I actually taught a kettlebell workshop in Denver, and I was like, ah, that's what
You
this
feel
is. I
it.
didn't even realize it. Then one of the attendees was like, "It's just the elevation. You'll be good." But
Yeah.
do you
Less
notice
oxygen
it when
here.
you come down to sea level at all? Do you notice your training effect?
I would say the only place I really notice is when I haven't been in Colorado and then I come back.
Yeah.
But in terms of like being at this elevation and then moving down to sea level, I don't think I particularly notice. Also, I haven't really been at sea level much since moving back here, so
Right.
it's hard to say.
Going back to environment, Marie. Do you
Yeah.
so you and I met in New York,
Hmm.
and now you live in Colorado. Probably, I mean, New York has mountains, the Adirondacks and the Catskills, and those are beautiful. But in terms of like your own personal creativity,
Hmm.
does your location influence your personal creativity? Do you feel more creative in one location versus another?
Well, I think the biggest thing I've noticed as which creativity absolutely stems from is just a sense of balance and homeostasis. And that was actually a big reason why I chose to make the move back to Colorado in the middle of the pandemic, is it just became so abundantly obvious to me that the reasons I thought I needed to be in New York weren't real. I was making those up. And my main interest in staying in New
Are you,
York is
Marie,
like,
are you comfortable sharing those reasons?
yeah, I was about to go into them.
Okay.
I had believed that as an entrepreneur, as a visionary in the movement space, that New York was the best place for me, being a hub for people with new ideas and like being able to network and get connected. And then the pandemic hit, and I realized, oh, everything is online now, anyways. And honestly, like has always been. So there's also the option to travel if I need to, but like anyone I want to connect with, I can do through the internet. And meanwhile, I'm living in this state where I don't have access to the nature I want. And I did a pretty good job of setting myself up in New York. I was in Park Slope, Brooklyn, right next to Prospect Park, which was my favorite park in the city. And I spent a lot of time there, but anytime I even went upstate, like I miss the Rockies because they are so
Yeah.
powerful and magnificent, and the nature is raw, and that's what I grew up in, and that's what I loved. And I came back to Colorado to visit during the pandemic to sort of test out this idea of moving back. And almost like the day I landed, I was like, nope, this is happening. And I will say that since moving here, it's initiated a lot of fundamental like life shifts in terms of how I prioritize sleep, how I make myself available with scheduling, and most importantly in relationship to nature. So I, for the first time in my entire life since I was probably 3 years old, I don't get sick every 2 to 6 weeks. And I used to get sick like almost every month or two, my entire adult life. And since COVID, I've only been sick once in like 2.5 years. And I think a huge part of that has been moving here. Now, in terms of creativity, I notice my relationship to creativity stems from a lot of things. Like environment is one part of it, but my sense of creativity really comes from a sense of feeling connected to myself, feeling powerful as myself, feeling brilliant as the person I am, like liking who I am. And from that basis, I think that's a really key emotional and mental sense of stability and safety that allows creative expression to flow. And I get creative in all sorts of spaces. I love the buzz of city life, so I'll occasionally go to Denver to coffee shops and work from there, and then I find myself in the movement studio getting creative in that space. And then sometimes it's, being out in nature solo, like I'll get a lot of different ideas just walking and moving, and things will start to click for me. So I personally find creativity flows through many channels. It also flows through speaking with people. And this has been a huge realization for me. Is I get a lot of my ideas when I hear myself speak. And so it's usually
Interesting.
in conversation and in relationship with people that it's like, oh, like something gets sparked and then I run off and do something with it after.
That's great. You get ideas when you hear yourself speak.
Yeah.
I guess that's just a form of us being alone with ourselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I get all my best ideas when I'm by myself. Just I'm probably speaking, but in my own head, and I don't even hear it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
That's great. Marie, I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for being here with me. I truly appreciate it. I am honored that you're on this show with me and sharing your wisdom. Where can individuals find more about your approach to movement and art and life and all that goodness?
Well, there's many channels to get in touch with me. I'm currently building out the Intuitive Movement website, which is actually listed as intuitivemovement.co, so just co. And then I'm also available through my personal website, mariejanicek.com, and through Instagram. So there's a lot I'm reworking at the moment. I'm actually developing a new structure for people to work with me with intuitive movement in a one-on-one capacity, but I hope to be hosting like workshops and classes in the future. Right now, I'm using the one-on-one model to sort of see the patterns, see the reoccurring themes that I feel would be the most useful on a mass scale, like through group work. Um, yeah, and I'm just really excited to be where I am and to be really creatively and playfully changing how we relate to movement. So I would say that for me, I'm here for anybody who like wants to feel more joy and who's willing to put down the belief system around struggle, sacrifice, and suffering in relationship to their body and is really to ready to build a relationship with themselves through a new model, through play, through pleasure, through fun. Because that for me, that's where all the magic is.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Marie. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jason.